Ethan had always believed that stability was the mark of a good life. His apartment with Michael reflected that: organized shelves, a quiet rhythm to the evenings, and a sense of safety that never wavered. Michael, his partner of 3 years, was dependable in ways Ethan admired. He remembered their first months together, when Michael's laughter had felt like sunlight, warming every corner of his restless heart. Yet as time passed, the brightness dulled. Ethan rarely admitted it, even to himself, but the passion had settled into routine, and the routine sometimes felt like a cage. That was when Daniel reappeared. Daniel had once been his roommate in college, confident, spontaneous, and magnetic in a way that made people lean closer without realizing. They hadn't spoken much after graduation, but when Daniel texted out of the blue, Ethan felt a rush of old familiarity. Their messages began casually, updates about work and city life, but soon the tone shifted into something lighter, teasing, almost intimate. Ethan told himself it was harmless, nothing more than friendship resurfacing. Still, when he typed the words, "You should come over for dinner one night," he knew it wasn't just casual. When Ethan mentioned it to Michael, his boyfriend's response was effortless trust. "Your old roommate?" "Of course, invite him," Michael said, smiling as he chopped vegetables for the meal. "It'll be good to meet him." The ease in Michael's tone only deepened Ethan's unease. He should have been relieved, but instead he felt exposed, as though the eagerness in his voice when he suggested the dinner had betrayed something. The night Daniel arrived, Ethan opened the door to the same crooked grin he remembered from their college years. Daniel stepped in with an energy that filled the apartment, his presence stirring something long buried. He complimented the space, clapped Ethan on the back with familiarity, and exchanged polite greetings with Michael. From the outside, it looked like an ordinary reunion of old friends, but for Ethan, it felt different. Dinner began with easy conversation. Michael asked Daniel about his work, his travels, his recent move back to the city. Daniel answered with charm, his voice carrying that same playful rhythm Ethan remembered from late nights in their shared dorm. They laughed about forgotten mishaps, retelling stories that made Michael chuckle along even though he hadn't been there. As plates were passed and glasses refilled, Ethan felt the air shift. Daniel's gaze lingered just a second too long when their eyes met across the table. A brush of fingertips as Ethan handed him the breadbasket sparked an unsteady current he tried to ignore. Michael, seated between them, noticed nothing. The nostalgia deepened into subtle tension. Daniel teased Ethan about his meticulous habits, the way he always kept his side of the dorm immaculate. "Some things don't change," Daniel said with a knowing smirk, glancing around the tidy apartment. Ethan laughed, but his chest tightened at the familiarity in the remark. Michael excused himself midway through dessert to take a late-night work call in the other room. His absence felt immediate, the silence heavy with possibility. Ethan and Daniel were left alone at the table, candles flickering between them. "Feels like old times," Daniel said, his voice low. Ethan forced a smile, but inside he was unraveling. He couldn't deny the way his heart thudded at the sound of Daniel's voice, the way his mind replayed memories of nights when their conversations had stretched until dawn, when their closeness had felt like something more than friendship. He cleared his throat, reaching for the wine bottle as though the motion could steady him. "Yeah," he said, avoiding Daniel's eyes. "Just a lot of memories." Daniel leaned back in his chair, watching him. "Some things never really go away, do they?" The words lingered in the air, unsettling in their truth. Ethan didn't respond. His hand trembled slightly as he poured the wine, the glass filling too quickly, spilling onto the tablecloth. He muttered an apology, dabbing at it with a napkin, but Daniel only smiled, the kind of smile that saw more than Ethan wanted revealed. When Michael's footsteps echoed down the hallway, returning to the room, Ethan's breath caught in his throat. The spell broke, but the tension remained, unspoken yet undeniable. The night continued in polite conversation, but Ethan knew the balance of his world had shifted. Something had begun at that dinner table, quiet, dangerous, and impossible to ignore. A week passed since their first encounter, and Ethan found himself replaying every detail in his mind. Daniel's uniform had been impressive, commanding even, but Ethan knew instinctively that it was only a fragment of who he was. The promise of seeing the man behind it lingered in his thoughts, pulling him towards something he could not yet name. When Daniel suggested meeting at a quiet coffee shop after his shift, Ethan's pulse quickened with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. Daniel arrived casually dressed, jeans paired with a soft, worn-in shirt, hair slightly tousled. Gone was the rigidity of the uniform, replaced by an approachable ease that somehow amplified his charm. Ethan noticed the subtle shift immediately, the relaxed way Daniel moved, the easy smile that reached his eyes. It was a reminder that the man he had admired from afar was more than a figure of authority. He was human, vulnerable, and intriguingly complex. The conversation began effortlessly, like two streams merging into a shared current. Daniel spoke about his childhood, about the moments that had shaped him, and the sacrifices he had made for a life of discipline. Ethan, in turn, found himself opening up in ways he rarely did, sharing memories of late nights spent sketching, small failures he had never admitted aloud, and dreams he feared were too ordinary to matter. With each word, the distance between them shrank, replaced by an unspoken understanding that felt rare and extraordinary. Daniel laughed at one of Ethan's stories, a soft, genuine sound that sent warmth through Ethan's chest. He noticed how Daniel's hands moved as he talked, deliberate, expressive, yet gentle, and felt drawn to the subtle rhythm of the gestures. For the first time, Ethan began to see Daniel not as a figure to admire from a distance, but as someone whose presence could ignite emotions he had long suppressed. The uniform had been impressive, yes, but this effortless authenticity, was what truly captivated him. Their time together stretched into hours, the world outside the cafe fading until only the two of them remained in focus. Small touches, accidental or deliberate, began to punctuate their conversation, a hand brushing against a notebook, a shoulder nudged playfully, a shared glance that lingered a second too long. Ethan's mind raced, aware of the growing tension between curiosity and desire, excitement and fear. He knew he was crossing boundaries he hadn't anticipated, yet the pull toward Daniel was irresistible. Daniel seemed aware of it too. There was a subtle intensity in his gaze, an unspoken acknowledgement of the connection that was forming. He asked questions not out of mere politeness, but from genuine interest, and Ethan found himself responding with a vulnerability he rarely allowed. Every confession, every shared laugh, deepened a sense of intimacy that neither could deny. The more he saw Daniel without the uniform, the more Ethan realized how much he had been drawn to the man beneath it, not the image he projected. As evening descended, Ethan felt a swirl of emotions he could hardly name. Part of him thrilled at the closeness, the whispered confidences, the gentle brush of Daniel's hand as they shared a laugh. Yet another part trembled at the implications. This was no casual friendship. The emotional gravity of their connection weighed on him, thrilling and terrifying in equal measure. He recognized, perhaps for the first time, that he was stepping into unfamiliar territory, a space where longing and morality coexisted uneasily, where attraction could blossom into something he was not yet prepared to navigate fully. Before parting, Daniel hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "I enjoyed tonight," he said quietly, voice low and earnest, "more than I expected." Ethan nodded, unable to find words that matched the intensity he felt. Their hands lingered briefly in a subtle, unspoken connection, a silent acknowledgement of what had begun. Then Daniel left, the door swinging softly behind him, leaving Ethan alone with his racing thoughts and the undeniable realization that his life had shifted. Ethan sat for a long moment, absorbing the weight of the evening. He understood, with both exhilaration and apprehension, that this was no ordinary connection. The man in the uniform had become the man he longed to know, the man who had stirred feelings Ethan had never confronted. And deep down, he knew that the next encounter would bring him closer to a truth he was not yet prepared to face, a truth that would challenge his heart in ways he could not yet imagine. Days turned into weeks after the trip, yet the echoes of that night clung to Ethan like the scent of rain after a storm, faint but impossible to forget. Life resumed its ordinary rhythm, but his mind wandered back to the cabin more often than he wanted to admit. Every detail replayed in quiet fragments, the candlelight on Noah's face, the tremor in his voice, the space that had opened between them. Ethan tried to bury it beneath routine. Work filled his days, exhaustion filled his nights. Yet, in rare moments of stillness, the silence returned, that same silence they'd shared beside the lake. It wasn't guilt that haunted him, It was longing mixed with the ache of uncertainty, the question of what if that refused to fade. One evening, as he walked home through the soft glow of city lights, his phone buzzed. A message from Noah: "I've been thinking about the trip. Can we talk?" Ethan stopped mid-step. He read the message twice before replying, "Yes." "When?" "Tonight. Same cafe we used to go to near the park." By the time Ethan arrived, the sky had darkened, and a light drizzle blurred the reflections in the street. The cafe was nearly empty, its windows glowing gold against the gray evening. Noah sat at a corner table, his hands wrapped around a steaming cup. When their eyes met, the unspoken weight of everything between them filled the room again. Noah smiled faintly. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I wasn't sure either," Ethan admitted, taking the seat across from him. For a moment, neither said anything. The hum of distant conversation and the clatter of dishes filled the quiet between them. Then Noah took a slow breath. "I need to say this," he began, his voice low but steady. "That night at the cabin. I wasn't drunk, and I wasn't confused. I meant what I said." Ethan's heart thudded. He looked at Noah carefully, the familiar eyes, the honesty written across his face. "You don't have to explain," he said softly. "I do," Noah replied. "Because it wasn't fair to leave it like that. You deserve to know what I felt, and what I still feel." Ethan's throat tightened. He had prepared himself for distance, not honesty. "Noah, you know what this means," he said quietly. "We can't," "I know," Noah interrupted gently. "We can't change who we are to each other. But pretending none of it mattered doesn't make it disappear." The truth of it hung in the air between them, sharp, fragile, undeniable. Ethan looked down, his fingers tracing the rim of his cup. He could feel the same conflict rising again, the heart wanting one thing, the mind insisting on another. "Finally," he said, "maybe what happened wasn't meant to turn into something else. Maybe it was just meant to show us who we are." Noah's expression softened. "And who are we, Ethan?" Ethan exhaled slowly. "People who felt something real, but in the wrong time, the wrong way. And maybe that's enough." Noah smiled sadly. "Maybe it is." They talked for another hour, not about love, but about life. About how moments sometimes matter more than outcomes. About how connection doesn't always require a name. The conversation was tender, honest, and clean of the weight it once carried. When they finally stood to leave, Noah hesitated at the door. "You ever think about that night?" "Every day," Ethan said simply. "But I think about it differently now." "How so?" "I used to see it as a mistake. Now, I see it as a mirror." Noah nodded, his eyes glistening. "Then I guess it taught us both something." "It did," Ethan said. "It taught me that love, any kind of love, only matters if it makes you more honest." Outside, the drizzle had turned to mist. They walked together for a few steps before their paths split. Noah paused, offering one last quiet smile. "Take care of yourself, Ethan." "You too, Noah." Ethan watched him disappear into the fog, the world around him soft and quiet. There was no sadness in the goodbye, only understanding. What had once been confusion had become clarity. That night, as Ethan returned home, the city lights seemed brighter, the air lighter. He realized that closure doesn't always come with distance, sometimes it arrives in the simple act of telling the truth. He sat by his window, listening to the faint hum of the street below, and whispered to himself, "Some stories don't end where love fails, they end where truth finally begins." And with that, Ethan finally felt free, not from Noah, but from the silence that had kept him captive for so long.